Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me okay. We are here. We're going to go ahead and get started with our SDS2 2020 Advanced Bill of Material. We're going to have a series of these type of webinars for SDS2 2020. We're going to take a little deeper dive into some of the options or some of the enhancements that we have in 2020. I know Laura did a webinar couple weeks ago, kind of giving an overview. Now we're going to take a step and look a little bit deeper. Today's we are specifically looking at the advanced bill of material. With 2020, we have made it hopefully simpler to manage the bill of material. We've given some options for being able to modify it or track it. Trackability should be easier. So we're gonna dive into what that looks like in 2020. What we are going to be specifically, kind of what we're going to be looking at today is setup. We have different things with setup. We have qualifiers. With those qualifiers, they're going to give us some options of what is included in the bill of material or in the ABM. We're going to look at generating, what kind of IDs we're going to get with those, some of the filtering and sorting, the rounding and additions, and then what material we're actually going to select when we are generating that ABM. We're going to look at the viewing, printing, and exporting, some different options that we have there, like exporting to Excel. And then what we generally have at the end of the ABM is updating, how to compare those changes and what we need to look for when we are actually updating that ABM. So we're going to start out with setup. I mentioned qualifiers. So what is a qualifier? So a qualifier is going to be an item that is used to determine what is a candidate or what's going to be possible to be selected when I'm actually creating that ABM. These qualifiers are used to market that it is able to be on the ABM by default. Now, I'll demonstrate all of this and kind of show you what that exactly means, but we call it a qualifier for a candidate for a reason, because it's a candidate to be in the ABM. There's going to be other options or other selection methods that we can still exclude it from the ABM. What these qualifiers do is, in the material edit or the member edit for a main material, it is going to check box that this is possible to be on an ABM. That can be overridden by editing the material or the member, and there's a little nuance there with members and material that I'll go over, but it can be overridden in the model by editing that member or material and deselecting it, and then it will no longer be qualified to be on an ABM. Now, very important that these qualifiers are, very important that these qualifiers are set up at the beginning of the project. Now, the reason for this is that once a member is added, if it is not qualified, it is not going to be check marked. If I go back and I adjust those qualifiers, it doesn't look at what is already added to the model. That's going to be for what is going to be added to the model. So if I add it to the model, it's not qualified. No matter what I do in the qualifiers, it's not going to be selected. I would have to go in and individually on those different members or materials and select that I want that to be part of and be a candidate for the ABM. Now, there are some member material options, so we're going to look at the member edit screen and material edit screen to see what those options are. But that checkbox that I talked about, that I can go in there and check or uncheck, or that the qualifiers automatically check, if a ABM is already generated, it does not remove that from the ABM. But what that can do is take the quantity. So if I create an ABM that is qualified, I use that material, I uncheck that, it's not going to take it off the ABM, but what it will do is exclude that from the quantities of materials in there. And we'll see all of this in some demonstrations. And then with lengths, there's a couple of different things that we'll see with how we calculate that length. A standard ABM will use the materials length to generate what the length is for the ABM, or we can change that to a point to point where it's the work point distance. So let's go ahead and jump right into the ABM. So where do I go for opening up the ABM? Now, one nice thing about 2020 that I think I mentioned at the beginning was that everything is in one place. So before, in previous versions, you had to kind of search around. Part of the ABM was over here, some of the setup was over here. We've moved it all into one location. Now, from the main menu, the easiest way to get there is from the System tab under Reports. I have the ABM report, and then I can say Run. What this will bring up is my ABM window showing up on another screen. Let me move that over here. So here we have our ABM report window. Now I can also access this through modeling or drawing editor under the reports pull down window under ABM. I can get to it there, but from the main menu, this is how I would access the ABM report window. So those ABM qualifiers that we talked about, that's important to set up at the beginning of a project before I start modeling material. So if I go into those ABM qualifiers, and this is similar to what we've had before with how we selected in previous versions, but over here we have, on the left hand side, we have our different member types that we can include with this, include to be a candidate for the ABM. So I have beams, columns, stairs, horizontal braces, vertical braces, and miscellaneous members. Then I shift over, so if I have all of those selected, what actual types of materials am I going to include in this ABM? And right now I have this set up. This is the way the default is. Wide flanges, channels, angles, WTs, round HSS, rectangular, square HSS, anything else except for plates with a thickness of greater than 3 inches, which I can come in here and I can kind of give some qualifiers to, or if I just want all plate, let's say I want all plate, I can uncheck the thickness and then it's going to include all the plate. So by default, it is set up for plate thicknesses over or equal to 3 inches. And then on the far right hand side, we have our qualifiers for if it's member main material, it's going to become a candidate for the ABM. Deselected is member connection material and miscellaneous material. So if I wanted my connection material to show up, I would need to checkbox this, but I have to remember that even if it's a shear plate and I have that connection material, unless it's over 3 inches, if I go back here to the middle, I'm not going to get that selected. So I have to be aware that even though I select member connection material, I have to have that material type selected in order for it to qualify to be a candidate. So there are my qualifiers. Let's go ahead and exit out of here. Now I have some members in my model that were created with those default qualifiers set. So let's go ahead and take a look at the model and see what we have there. So here's my model. Now if I go ahead and let's just edit this member right here. Okay, so we have our member edit here now. And if we look here, we have ABM. Now we see that there is a checkbox next to the ABM. That means that it is qualified to be a candidate. Because I have my qualifiers on for beams and for wide flanges, this piece is a candidate. So I have it selected there. Now, as far as the next slot is blank, that is where the ABM that it is on. So I can create multiple ABMs. This will tell me which ABM it is actually on. Right now, I haven't generated an ABM, so that's blank. And also the ID, that is also blank. There are some different options for how we give an ID that we'll go over here in a second. On the far right of that is ABM note. So I am able to add a note that can show up in my ABM report that I can add that note right here. Now, if I add something like camber on this beam, it will automatically fill that out in the ABM note. If we look down below the length, this is what I kind of showed in the PowerPoint a little bit. I have standard ABM. That is the default. There is no way to change that default at this point. So it's always going to come in as standard ABM, but I do have the option, you know, if I have some one-offs that I want to know that it's point to point, I can select point to point and it's going to figure that length out by point to point. Now it is set to auto, so it's automatically calculating that, and point to point for this is 27'6" and 1/8. Or I can go back to my standard ABM, and it is showing 0 right now. Once I generate that ABM, it will fill that out for me. So that's kind of the member edit screen. Let's take a deeper look and go to the material edit screen, because right now the member edit screen, this is just getting information from the main material of this member. So if I go and do a material edit on this, this is what is actually feeding that member edit screen. So if I look at the material edit here, I have my ABM checked because it is qualified. It is a wide flange piece of material. It is a main material for a beam. And my standard length, all of that information is right here. So if I add a note here, that should transfer up to the member because the member is getting that information from the main material. But if I look at, say, a piece of connection material, so if we zoom in here a little bit further, and let's just go to the cap plate of this column since it's easy to get to, we'll go ahead and edit it. And oh, I edited the connection component, so let's go ahead and edit other and edit the actual piece of material. So here I will see that the ABM is not checked. So this is a piece of connection material. This wasn't a qualifier. But let's say this piece or some other piece of material, maybe there's a odd plate or something that has a different steel grade that I want to include on my ABM. I can come in here and I can check that. Now it is qualified to be on that ABM. So I can go and select those maybe one-offs. If it's not a qualified, I can come in and I can actually select that to be qualified to be on the ABM. There are some options, since we're in this location, there are some options with update status. So if I go to my model pull down window, and I go to update status, I will see that I have some ABM options here. If I select that, yes or no, is it qualified for the ABM, yes or no? ABM point to point. So on these main materials, if I want to use the point to point for all of my different members, I could easily do it with update status. I could say yes, point to point. Now it's going to change it from standard ABM to ABM point to point. And if I want to use this for a number of members to add a note, I can do that as well. Also with status display, I do have the option to show these items that are qualified for the ABM. So if I come in here and I say I want them to be green when any of the conditions are true, if we go to our material status and we go to ABM Candidate and we say yes, let's go ahead and say apply, we will see that all of the members or all of the materials that are qualified for the ABM are shown up in green. Now, there's a couple of things here that I want to point out that are not green. If I look at my stair here, it is not green. But if I look at my stair down below here, it is qualified. Now, these are all defaults. I did not go in and modify any of these to uncheck or check them. So right now, when using certain scripts, this stair was created with the quick add tool, which is a script that goes in there and adds a stair. that tool was not programmed to look at those qualifiers to see if it should set that tag for ABM Qualified or not. So be aware that custom members, if I add a handrail, it is not going to automatically add that to the ABM. Now that may be a project in the future to add that programming to those different scripts, but as of right now, it is not in there. So even my GERTs right here are not qualified to be on the ABM. So just be aware of that. Use this status display to double check to see what is qualified, what is not qualified, and make sure you're getting all of your stuff. Now, if I come in here and I come in and select all of these, or if I do a select by status display, I can go ahead and I can select maybe certain member types like GERTs, and I can go ahead and edit that material and set that to be qualified for the ABM. So there's ways of getting around that, but I just wanted to point that out that certain scripts do not automatically add that tag to those qualifiers. Okay, so now we have what we want on that, what we want as qualifiers. I'm gonna go in here and just quickly add these other stairs to the qualifiers just so we can get that information into our ABM. If it lets me edit them. So in my stair edit here, I see that this is not ABM qualified. If I go ahead and put a checkbox there, we'll say okay. Now it should change that status to being green. It's going through and processing that member. Probably should just edit them both together. And we'll edit this last one. We'll qualify that for the ABM and say okay. So now that we've got what we want qualified for the ABM, now we need to generate the actual file. So let's go back and look at our ABM report window. And we have a couple of things that we're going to look at. So we have report layout. So this will allow me to define what is going to be in the report or what is visible in the report. This is similar to the bill of material layout, some other tables that we have in SDS2, where I can come in here and I can tell it that I want this to be number one in the order, the ABM ID. I can deselect these or select new ones. Maybe I want the major mark, the minor marks in there. My file format, I can create this as a delimited file or a text file. We're going to leave it as a text file. And then there's also an option to show ABM entries with a quantity of 0. If something gets deleted out of the model and it has a quantity of 0, I don't want to see those quantities of zeros, I can deselect that. By default, that is on because most people want to see those because they know that there's a change there then. So we'll go ahead and say okay to that report layout. So now we're going to create a new ABM. Now, if I already had created an ABM, it would show a list of my different ABMs here. We're going to go ahead and say new. So with the new, it will allow me to name my ABM, and we're just going to call this one 2020 ABM. Here we could select some options with an existing ABM file. If we're trying to overwrite that, we can do that. We're just gonna go ahead and say okay here, and it will bring us up a screen to allow us to tell it how we want to create this ABM. So here is the tracking ID method. So we have two different options here. Traditionally, in previous versions of SDS2, we had a page and line. That represents which page it's on, which line it's on that specific page. Now we have something called System ABM ID. This goes away from the page and line a little bit to give us a little bit more trackability. If something changes, so let's say that there's everything on the line changes, it's going to stay on that same line. But let's say it breaks something off. Now with the traditional page and line, it's going to break that off and put that at the end of the ABM. With the system ABM ID, it is actually going to start breaking it down a little bit. So it might be 1.1.a. We're going to look at that a little bit. We're going to get some revisions. We're going to see how that affects that, but it keeps it in line and makes that trackability of where this started and not appending it to the end of the report, ABM report. Starting page number, we're going to leave this at 1. We're going to go ahead and do the system ABM ID just so we can look at that. We all know what a page and line number looks like. Let's look and see what the system ABM ID looks like. Now, we do have some sorting and some more filtering. We can go ahead and sort by zone, by sequence, by member type. And then with zone and sequence, we also have limits. So we could go ahead and say that we want to see only sequence 1A to 1A. That would only give us materials that are in sequence 1A. We're not going to set a limit. We're just going to look at all the sequences. Then we have length rounding. So this is an area where we've expanded a little bit. Before it was kind of a all or nothing type thing. Now we can really drill down and look at different member types, different material types, and how we want to look at those pieces of material, or how we want to round those pieces of material. Right here we have it set by default to all member types. Maybe I want to only specifically look at beams. Maybe I only want to look at beams that are wide flanges. I want to ignore pipes, or maybe I want to do pipes or tube steel. I can dig down a little bit further there. And when it's a beam and it's with wide flange material, I want it to round up exact length or round down how many inches with a 3-inch overrun and a 10-foot zero underrun. So by default, that's the way it's set up. Now I can modify those and change those to whatever my practices are. But let's say now I have beams and wide flanges. I want to come in here and I want to add a new one, hit the plus button, and I can come in here and say columns that are, let's go with tube steel. I want to round up to 3 inches with a 3-inch overrun and maybe a 5-foot zero underrun. So I can modify those, break it down by member type, and also then by material. Now, if I didn't care, maybe I just wanted all beams, columns that are wide flange, I could say all member types that are wide flange. Or maybe I don't care about column tube steels, I want all member types that are tube steel. Now, let's say I didn't want that, I want to delete that. There's a trash can right there, I can delete that one. So right now, all I have set up is for my wide flanges to round up. I'm going to go ahead and change that back to all material types just so we get that rounding on all my material types. Then we have operation additions. So here, once again, we can break it down by member type and by material type, but we also have material with the different ends, end cuts. So here, by default, we have curved and rolled material. We're going to add a length of 3'0". Maybe on a bevel cut end, I need to add a certain amount. With that, we can do an add a length of and give it a dimension, or we can round up to the nearest. So if I say round up to the nearest and I put 1 in there, it's going to round up to the nearest inch. If I say round up to the nearest and I put 1/2 of an inch, it's going to round up to the nearest 1/2 of an inch. So we have those options of either rounding that up or adding length, and I can add more files here. So if I want to say my all member types, all material types with bevel cut ends, round up to the nearest 1/2 inch. Now it's going to round those up to the nearest 1/2 inch. So that's our general settings. We'll go back. We have our tracking ID method, our starting page number, some sorting and some filtering. Then we have our length rounding and operation additions. we're going to go ahead now and say create. So this is going to go through and create the ABM. Well, before it creates the ABM, I said we're going to have another option to select what material we want to have in this. We said that checking that box in the member edit screen or material edit screen is going to make it a candidate. Well, now that it's a candidate, how are we going to select that? Here we have a new screen to populate the ABM. Now I can select by materials or by members. Right now I don't have a lot of connection material or anything like that. Most of it is by member, so it doesn't matter if I change it to materials or members, it's gonna kind of be the same there. My sort order, if I want to sort this by member type, and we'll put that as my first sorting, there it's going to put all my beams first, my columns, my vertical brace, stairs are in there. So I can sort those so I can select them easier. So maybe I just wanted to do all of my beams. I can come in here and these are all beams and select all of my beams. So these are ABM candidates and we've just now added those to the ABM. So I can do some sorting here if I want to dive down a little bit deeper, or if I've set it up correctly where it's all the correct candidates and I don't need to do any more sorting, I can just say select all, move all of those over to add to the ABM. Now all of those are going to be included in this ABM that I'm creating. So we're going to go ahead and say create ABM. It will go through and create that report. So once that's created, from here, we can start looking at the printing, reviewing, looking at that ABM. So let's go ahead and say review, modify ABM. This will give us a list of this current ABM. So right now I'm in 2020 ABM. If I created a new one, there will be, let's cancel this real quick. There will be a list of those different ABMs. Maybe I have one for my beams, one for my columns, whatever it might be, one for my wide flanges, I don't know, whatever you guys might want to do, that list will be there. So when I have it selected up here, that's which one I'm reviewing or modifying. So just be aware that it's not going to give me a selection of which one I'm reviewing or modifying, but it will ask me for which revision of that. We haven't updated it yet, so it's just the original revision. So we're going to go ahead and review this. So right here, it brings this ABM up in a text viewer here, and we will see my ABM ID. This ABM ID is what we selected of 1.1.0. So it's basically page 1, line 1, and revision 0. Shows me that's quantity of 4, W21 by 44. We have all of that information there. If I would have filled out an ABM note, that information would be there as well. What I'm seeing here is what I have set up in my report layout. That's what it's going to export and show me. Now, there is an option in here that I can change that. Let's say that somebody gave me an ABM ID for something. Maybe I want to change the length, change the weight. I can come in here and I can put that ABM ID as test. Now, once I change that, it is going to change to a bluish text there. So be aware that modifying this, it will make me aware that something has been modified. Now, modifying this here does not modify it back on the member edit screen or the material edit screen. So I have to be aware that I'm not modifying what's back in the model. If I want to move it forward, I can go to the model, change that ID, change that length, and then update the ABM, and it will get that updated information. But doing it here does not work backwards. But if I want to make a quick change, quick fix, I can do that here if I need to. From here, I can print the ABM. I can export to an XLSX file, and then view that in Excel and make any changes that I want there. Some people say, well, why would I want to edit my ABM here? Why would I do that? Well, if we export it to an XLSX file, you can make any of those modifications there. So we decided to give you that option here to make those changes as well. Now, if I want to revert back to what it actually is, if I click in that field, I can revert cell, and it will change it back to what it originally was. So let's go ahead and say okay here. So we've reviewed, modified that ABM. We can go ahead and print the ABM report right here. So we can say, let's just go ahead and export this out to an XLSX file. And I'm going to save this to my desktop. Got to give it a name. Just give it 2020 ABM. Now I need to go find that on my desktop. And I'm going to open that up in Excel just so we can see what it looks like there. Okay, so here it is in Excel. I have my ABM ID, my quantity, my material length, all that information that I saw before right here in Excel. So let's go ahead and close out of that. Okay, so now that we've generated a file, we've shown that we can print it, review, modify it, print it. We can export it to an XLS file. There's also an option here to do an ABM KISS export. What that is going to do is take the information that is in that ABM and export it in a KISS file format. Now, this doesn't mean that it's going to take all the materials. It's just in that specific ABM, that 2020 ABM, there's certain materials that are in there. It's going to export those materials into a KISS export. Now, there is also the option, if we go back to our main menu, right here, if we go to our MRP and we go to KISS, I say setup here. We do have the option in our KISS setup to use a data source of the ABM. So that works just like what I have with my ABM KISS export. It'll ask me which ABM I want to export that information from and give me that information. But let's say I'm still using the bill of material. There is an option, even when using these other sources, to include the ABM notes in that KISS file. So that option is there. With this ABM, we set up some criteria when we created it. I can go back and I can view what that ABM criteria is, modify it so that when I update it, it may do some different things. But when it comes to length rounding and operation additions, those are not modifiable. Once I create that ABM, that is what those are going to be set to. So let's go back into the model and let's look at maybe making some modifications to some pieces of material and see how that affects our ABM when we update that ABM. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to edit this member right here again that we saw before. And I apologize, my computer is slow today. Maybe I didn't double click it. Maybe I'm just slow. There we go. So we will now see that this ABM is filled out. It's part of ABM 2020 ABM. It has an ID of 5.1.0. The length is still standard ABM, and now it fills out that length at 27'0". Now, a couple of things that I can do here. If I want to come in here and I want to change this ID, I can modify this ID right here. If I want to change this now to point, it's going to give me a different length for that point. But be aware that just changing that doesn't change what's on the ABM. That ABM was generated. It would need to be updated in order for that information to be actually updated on the ABM report. Now, there's an auto button. If I want that to be even something different, now I know I have some overruns and underruns. Just for the point of showing how that's going to affect my ABM once I update it, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to mark this as 40-foot 0. Just so I know it's over that 3-foot overrun, 10-foot underrun, 40-foot 0 will give me some differences. I know that for sure. So let's go ahead and modify that one at that. And let's look at another one and let's edit this piece right here. And let's actually change the section size of this one. So this one will change, be broken off of what is actually the page in line for it now, or the ABM ID for it now. Let's just change it to a W18 by 35. Small change, but will give us a difference. So we'll go ahead and say okay there. And we're going to take a piece of connection material and we're going to now turn that on just so we can see how that gets added to the bill of material as well. Now, just because something isn't in the qualifier doesn't mean that I can't mark it as being a candidate for the ABM. The qualifier just is the thing that it looks at when it's going to try to set a default in the model. So let's just go to this plate. Let's edit this plate. And we're going to go ahead and set this plate as being qualified for being in the ABM. So we'll go ahead and check that box and we'll say okay. So now we've made a few changes. We're going to go ahead and see how that affects what we've done. Let's go back to our ABM screen. And we're going to go ahead and say update ABM. So right away, I will see that I have a new plate that is in there. So this is now qualified. So if I want to actually include this in this ABM, I need to select it, use the select all, select that one piece, and move that into the add to ABM. So it's actually going to add that now to the ABM. You will also see at the bottom of the screen, there are a number of materials already on previous ABM not listed above have changes and need to be updated too. So those two pieces that we changed the length on one of them and we changed the section size, it's showing me that two pieces actually need to be updated. So if you're ever in doubt of did something change, you can always come in here. You don't have to actually update the ABM when you're at this screen. You can cancel out of this, but you can see if something has changed and if there does need to be an update to that ABM. In this case, I do want to change that. I want to update that ABM, so I'm going to go ahead and say update ABM. And it will give me a screen here that tells me that it's about to be updated. The current revision is original, created on today's date. The updated revision will become revision 1. Would you like to continue with this ABM update? I want it to be revision 1. I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and it's going to go through and update that ABM. Now when I go to review and modify the ABM, I'm going to see the original and I'm going to see revision 1. So if I go to revision 1 and I say review, I will see now my ABM. Now, what's changed? How do I know what's changed? Everything, it looks the same. Now, when we review that ABM, if something has changed, it will mark it as yellow in my review modify ABM. Now, if I go to print this or I go to export this to Excel, it's not going to have those yellow cells there. But when I'm reviewing it or modifying it, it will show me those yellow cells just so I can quickly see what's changed. Now, right here, I see that I have 5.1.1. Currently, I have 0 of those. So I took the same beam and I modified both of those pieces. So 5.1.1 no longer exists. There's 0 of those. Now it's broken it out. I have 5.1a.0 and 5.1b.0. And we can see that now 5.1a.0 has a quantity of 1 and it has a 40-foot length. Then we have 5.1.b, which has 1 and is now W18 by 35. This is where that trackability comes in, because with using the page and line number, what would happen in this case is the page 5 line 1 would have a quantity of 0. These two new pieces would get appended to the end of the ABM report. Here they stay with that piece. Now, I know some people like to have that page and line number so they can easily reference it, that they need to do that, but this is just another option that if the actual page and line number don't mean as much, I can go ahead and create that report. Everything's digital now. I can go and search things really easily. But this just gives me that extra layer of trackability to see what has actually changed, where it originally was. Just makes it a little bit easier. Now, if nothing had changed, or if both of these pieces had changed, I would still get a quantity of 2. It would handle it a little bit differently. But since we changed both of them, I get those 3 different lines there. And if we look down at the bottom of the report, we will probably see, up there we go, there's our plate that was added. This is also in yellow. Now I can print, export to XLS, do whatever I need to do. Now, another way for trackability, we've added event logging for the ABM. So if I go to my, I believe it's under job options and event logging, and I get my event logging screen up here. By default, it has material ABM will have event logging turned on. So default, when you create a new job, that is going to be turned on. Well, what information is that going to actually give me? If I actually go to let's go to one of these members that we've changed, because this is one that's going to be important to find out what exactly changed. If I edit this material of this piece, now you saw in event logging that I had material ABM, so that's where this information is going to get stored, is in the material. So if I go into my general information, I'm sorry, not my general information, yeah, general information, and then properties, I should see in my log that I have some information that has been tracked. So right here, it's telling me that an ABM entry was created. It was assigned 5.1.0. If I look down here, the material length has changed for the ABM, and a new line was created, and now it's 5.1a.0. So it's kind of tracking not only what the page and line number was, what it is, and this goes true if I use the page and line number ID, it will give me this information, but it also tells me why it was changed, because in this case, the material length was changed on the ABM. So there's some good trackability there when some of those things change. Now, one thing that I will say with this is we have right now turn this on in the material. So by default, it's on in the material. Now let's say that this material gets changed. So let's say I'm doing connection material, so a clip angle, and I go from a 3-row clip to a 4-row clip, and something changes with that ABM. If that material is completely deleted and recreated, I'm going to lose that logging on that. So just be aware that it's not 100%, because there's certain things that we can't do because that material has completely changed. But for the most part, when I'm doing my main material, it's going to give me some good trackability. But there is also an option under that job options. Let's see where we go. Options, job options, event logging. There is also the option to turn it on for members. So if I turn it on that ABM on members, even if my main material changes, it's still going to track that on my member edit screen event logging. So I do have that option to log that in the member edit screen as well. So now we've done some changes. We've modified the ABM. There is another option, or not another option, another tool for when we're looking at that ABM. Nope, brought the wrong screen up. So let's go to our ABM screen. We do have the print material change notice. So this is kind of like the compare that we had in previous versions. So if I hit that print material change notice, let me close out of that. So when I do that, it will ask me from certain revision to the other revision. So if I have 20 revisions, I can compare the original to the 20th. Or if I want to compare the 19th revision to the 20th, I can do that. Right now I only have 2, so I'm just going to go from the original to the first. And this will give me some of that trackability as well, and show me exactly what has changed on that ABM. So if I look looks more like our traditional ABM from before, but it shows me that 5.1.1 has a -2. So both of those got removed from my ABM, and it added a W18/40 at 5.1a.0 and a 5.1b.0. So I can run that report and get that information there as well. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint slide and kind of talk about, so we talked about setup. I just want to make sure that we have everything covered. We talked about generating, viewing, printing, exporting, updating that PDF. We have a few minutes for questions. I'm gonna look back at the questions and see if there's anything that anybody has asked.